Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and today is going to be the second part of a discussion that we started on the last week on the last show about a documentary that my current guest is going to talk about that will be dealing with the Alamo City. I'd like to put up the the poster for that one in a minute. It's called the Walk on the River, a Black History of the Alamo City. And it's done by my current guest who we left off on part one of the show, and this is part two. And we left them making a great discussion on why him and his co-producer and director of this documentary, Brother Born Logic Allah, who could not be here for the last these two discussions, but we try to carry his spirit by mentioning his name as we talk about what they produce and why we produce. But the gentleman that's sitting next to me, Brother Baba Anda Ma'at, who is one of the producers of this documentary, Walk on the River. He was discussing where we left off on and if you haven't seen the first part of this discussion, well, we'll continue and hope you'll enjoy the second part. And before I continue, for those of you who might be new to the show, what is the Umoja Circle? Well, it's an African-centered talk show whose purpose is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as a people, not only in this country but around the world when it comes to, and we left off at a very important point of why brothers like Brother Born Logic and Brother Baba Andar are these true documentarians that are putting history, the fact of history, on film, especially the history here of Black San Antonio and why he produced this film. Before I start, I want to make sure that people understand that this is not their first go-around. Both these brothers put this image, there's the image of the message to the people, a study of Malcolm X. This was one of their first projects, earlier projects that they did together. And what we're talking about today, the Walk on the River, is their current project. And I've seen both of them in the theaters locally, and man, you must see these two films. So the last time I had to I cut you off because we were running out of time.
Yes, sir.
As we usually do when the both of us get into a in-depth conversation, especially when it comes to our love and history.
Yes, sir.
And we were talking about cultural myth.
Yes.
And one of the reasons that you put this film together with Brother Logic is to knock away the cultural myth of people of African descent here on the East Side. You said the video starts what, in 1865?
1865,
and it
yes,
goes
sir.
on?
It's from 1865 to 1965,
okay.
so covering about 100-year period.
And in 1865, there was a lot of cultural myths that were established to perpetuate the image of people of African descent. You had to justify slavery for 246 years, at least in this, in America from 1619 to 1865. There was a well-established culture of belief of who we were and who we are that somehow still filters into the psyche of today, the 21st century America. And films like yours are breaking through those cultural myths. We talked about Sankofa, which means to reconnect.
Yes.
and you were talking, and you were bringing the point that, you know, how we have to basically re-educate ourselves.
Yeah, you know, when we talk about history, and I think we had kind of cut off there because we was talking about education development here in San Antonio, and I was just mentioning Mr. Samuel Sutton and his wife Lillian, how they had these children. I think they had 12 children that all received college degrees, and you're talking about in the talking about the 1900s, the mid-1900s, early 1900s, mid-1900s. So then you talk about some of these children that then went on to do great things in the world. So you talk about G.J. Sutton, who became the first black state representative here in San Antonio. You talk about his brother, Percy Sutton.
Percy Sutton, we
who,
all
of course,
heard of that.
yes, who Tuskegee Airman, went on to become a lawyer, owned the Apollo Theater, the lawyer for Brother Malcolm X, and of course,
And they were from?
They was all the families here in San Antonio.
Wow.
And here they would have people like Booker T. Washington come here, and George Washington Carver come here and stay at their home. So see, we have this history, and the point I was really making was that African people of African descent, were always seeking education. I mean, even in the period of enslavement, when they were saying that we was pretty much ignorant and couldn't know and didn't want to know, we was always trying to find a way to learn the basics, and then develop our minds in a way where we could be, where we can contribute to our family and our community. So in the documentary, what we're trying to share in the history is that we're coming out of a period of enslavement, but the foundation and the determination is there, because then African American people start developing businesses. They start developing educational systems. They start developing, you know, a political system, trying to accumulate some kind of power, influence within the city. And I'm saying all this is part of what people do, because this is a part of human development. And it took place here in San Antonio, right here. So you had people like Mr. Charles Bellinger, who was at the time in the early 1900s, was the wealthiest black man in San Antonio, and one of the wealthiest black men in the state of Texas, and how he was able to use his resources to accumulate and to, you know, to gain political power and influence, and how that political influence then helped develop the east side of San Antonio. And the reason why is because at the time, of course, they had poll tax, and there was always some kind of system developed to try to keep us from voting. But he was, with his finances, he was able to pay the poll tax and then encourage people if we vote this way, then we can, then we can gain some political influence and power in San Antonio, and people would listen, because many times it was that vote of African Americans that decided who was going to be mayor or city council person. So anyway, the stories, as we're talking about this, you know, and I get very excited about this aspect, because I think as we start to learn this history, it's exciting and it's encouraging, and it gives us insight into the fact that in spite of the struggles, in spite of the obstacles, we was a people of self-determination. We were people really having a vision of what we wanted to have for our family and communities. So there were people in the community developing institutions like Miss Ella Austin. When she saw there was no orphanage for black children, what did she do? She didn't wait for someone else to address that issue. She went out, she created an orphanage, and along with the Progressive Women's Club, they established that here in San Antonio. And in the film, to me, and that really it brings forward, is that that was a period, and particularly that 100-year period, where we as a community saw a need for things and addressed those needs by using our creativity, our sense of self-determination, working collectively together to build the community that we wanted for ourselves and for our future.
That reflected us.
Yes.
You know, in the early part of the first show, we talked about the foundational properties of history, that even as friends.
Yes.
You and I are friends, but we might not have seen each other for a little while. But as soon as we come together, we intuitively, because most people don't know that what they're doing. You reconnect by talking about the history.
Yes.
Man, I haven't seen you in a long time. The last time I saw you, you were doing this.
Yes.
How's that job come along? Or
Exactly.
how's the kids doing? Last time I saw them, they were this high. Now they're, teenagers. So history is more than just dates and times.
Exactly.
We have to understand that. And what you are reinforcing with this documentary that you're putting forth, or even the previous one that you did on Malcolm, he died in the 60s, but his legacy and the knowledge,
yes.
when we reconnect, we not only reconnect to the times he was talking about, we have a comparison to see how far did we come from what he's talking about. Do we still say the same things and have the same complaints and the same critical critique of the society as people of African descent that he had in the late 1960s by the time of his death, or Martin, or any of the other people of that time?
Yeah.
The critical, like a case study.
Yes.
History is also a case study of who we are.
Definitely. And history gives us first a continuity. It takes us from a place where we are familiar with, and it gives us a point to where we are today. But it also gives us a direction on where we are to go into the future. Sometime in history, it shows as we look back, we may have misstepped, we may have taken the wrong turn, and we have to ask ourselves.
It's a map, kind of a map.
Yes, it's a map.
So
it's
you can find whatever your goal is, you need a map to and I look at people like you or elders, like when I talk to a young brother or sister, and I wanted to explain to them how important history is, because again, we are conditioned to believe it has no importance in our lives, which is not. It is something that that keeps you in a dominant. Keep you dominated.
Yes.
Because you won't be able to, like you said, find out where you're going. It'll be kind of confusing to you. Yes. Where do you fit in? We're in San Antonio, and we have a city, say Houston. And when we want to drive from here to San Antonio, if you're going west towards California, you might want to go to Houston all you want, but you'll never arrive there unless you follow those road signs.
Yes.
And a history and an elder would point you in the right direction.
Exactly.
I didn't put that sign out to say, on Highway 90, that Houston is, in that direction, east 100 and something miles away. So at least you'll know. You could stop along the way. You might take a side trip based on who you are, but this is where I'm going if I want to get on that road.
And I think that is an excellent point, because when we started with this documentary, as I mentioned before, is that we interviewed a lot of our elders, and we interviewed people like Mr. Charles Williams Barber College, Mr. Mario Salas, Miss Nettie Hinton, Miss Vera Young, and many others. And what we learned from this is that our elders, these are people who have that connection to the history. So it's imperative that we sit down as a people with our elders.
And talk to them.
If that's in our community or if that's within our home, we must get that information, because their experience will help guide us as we move into the future. Yes, they can help us, because they know from their own experience and can give us insight into where we are to go into the future, or at least give us lessons that may help us and guide us. And I think this is a thing that really, with the Walk on the River of Black History at Alamo City, what we're also encouraging is that we have this history throughout our cities and towns and within our family, everywhere. So this is a critical time for us as a people to be able to connect that history, because to me, you're making the point that if we don't know the history, it's like a person with amnesia. I mean, you don't know yesterday. So how would that appear? A person walking around don't know their name, don't remember where they live, don't know their family members from yesterday. That would be very confusing.
And how that person would function. Now, we you know, there's so many of our youth who are angry or use the N-word in which they describe themselves, not understanding where that came from and what were people like hearing in the 1860s, you know, who some of them, or in the early 1900s, some of the brothers or sisters who were lynched. That was the last word they heard. If you don't, you can't honor them by using because they took that sacrifice in hope. They always had that dream that future generations would not hear those words, would not suffer the way. That was always the dream of those brothers who started those schools or started those communities, because they wanted better than what they were dealing with outside those communities, because they had to go into, you know, the segregated America. You know, you even have to have a special map to even drive from New York to South Carolina or somewhere. So there was a world outside of those bastions of healing. That's why I call our black communities, that we could be who we are, or we're meant to be.
Yes.
You know, so, but if you don't know that history, and you're using the words of those people who were using them outside those communities, you're doing dishonor to those ancestors and elders.
Yeah, and when we lack the knowledge of our past, sometimes we can take on the ways that are not our ways.
Yeah, you don't know who you are.
You know, it becomes take on the ways of your oppressor, or those who have, you know, enslaved you or taken advantage of you. So what I think the film helps us to understand is that, and I mentioned this before, is in spite of the many obstacles, the challenges, the attempts to hold back, I think it shows very clearly that people of African descent have always had a sense of self-determination and creativity. Because what happens is that when you're a space, or you put into a space that you're very limited, in the sense of people are trying to create limitations.
Deliberately,
where now you become really very creative, and you become more determined, because that is the human nature. And I think coming out of that period, 1865 up to about 1965, really is, I think in some regard, is a golden age for us, because to me, it showed clearly that we were a people who were very creative, and we were a people who were very self-determined, and we were a people who understood family and community. And that took place here in San Antonio, as it took place across many cities and towns in America for us. We just wanted a space where we could do for ourselves. And I think the lesson from that, and the thing that we have to ask ourselves, where are we now?
One of the things, to that point, that you just made me remember something that I heard many years ago, that this was from a brother, a black psychiatrist, Dr. Naeem Akbar. And see if I could remember. The psychology of a people, he said, is drawn from their unique history as that people. So how we think today culturally, okay, how we perform today is drawn, whether we know it or not, from how we dealt with those obstacles in the past, okay? And the mind that we carry today was transmitted to us culturally. The way the DNA that shaped our nose and the eyes was transmitted to us from generation to generation biologically. So we got to understand, you know, sometimes those genes, they don't do us a favor. That we got to, you know, adjust and adapt to what something in that gene. But so if that information that we are passing on is not accurate, and we have a clear picture of what those people do, because what you just said about those black men and women from 1865 and the struggle, that's not in our daily dialogue. A lot of times we hear the negative that, you know, I've still seen in some of the, you know, the like Facebook and those type of commentary, well, why don't black people come together? Well, we should deal with the economics, and, you know, it's up, they just make these statements, you know, it's economics that get, well, we did do economics. Well, what were the forces that was arrayed against us, like you said, that we overcame? Not that we were beat back, we overcame those forces. What happens? What happened? What's the case study
Yeah.
History is a case study also, and we're not there because that's what I call the cultural myths that are still permeating. That I hear quoted by, you know, when you come up to young brothers and sisters who still think like that, how do you deal with that? When they quote the cultural myth that black people haven't done anything, why are we not educated, or why don't we come together when, you know, historically, we've always done that.
Well, the myth can be sometimes our greatest handicap, because if you think you haven't done anything, or we have never done anything as a people, then we will sit around thinking that we can't do anything.
Or buy into somebody else's propaganda.
And the idea is that if you sit around thinking you can't do anything, then you're waiting for someone to come and do something for you.
The Messiah syndrome.
Yes. So now we have to break out of that, and that's why history is so important, that we look at it in its completeness. And that is say that, no, there have always been a number of African American people struggling to do better, to build better. And of course, it's evident here in San Antonio. I mean, it was evident when we was on the plantations. That was those who were struggling and revolting and fighting to get free. That was those.
We were never docile.
No, exactly. So we was never sitting around waiting for someone to come and save us. We was always finding ways to what we can save ourselves and create for ourselves. So when we know that aspect of history, that should inspire us, and it should instruct us about what we can do and what we have an obligation to do for the future. Now, history, and I want to say this, is that sometimes we get to a crossroad in history, and sometimes we move forward, but in moving forward, we really take a step back.
Explain that.
When we got down into the 1965, 1970, we were struggling. Of course, we had the Black Power movement, we had the liberation movement in Africa going on, and we had all these things going on in the world. Well, of course, colonialism ended in Africa, but they brought about neo-colonialism. Yeah. Segregation fell down in America, but did we really integrate? Because, and the point I'm making is that at one time we had a community that was more self-sufficient and self-sustaining, and now we find ourselves diluted out into a larger community. Now we are finding ourselves, somebody else is educating. Well, it's education system, we're always someone else basically, but the fact is now we're in someone else's classroom that may not have that great appreciation for black children. And I'm talking about when they integrated the schools and integrated the community and so forth. Yeah. Now, what happened, and I say this, is that sometimes as we move forward, sometimes we lose ground. And I'm saying we lose something that's more valuable than we ever could gain in integrating into a larger community. And I'm saying the sense of self-determination.
You're absolutely right, because we were the only group that actually bought into the integrating. Because if you go to an Italian community, you can find Little Italy and all the history goes back hundreds and hundreds of years in Italy, or Chinatown. There's still groups and cultural that maintain that part of them. But the destruction of the Fani and the Guy and all the people that we descend from, that's the insidiousness of slavery. You know, the culture that we tried to put together in 1865 that took a little bit of this. That's what we call ourselves, not Fani people. We call ourselves African people. Yeah. Because we have the DNA of many different groups. That's why we could pick from the Fani, we could pick from the Yoruba, we could pick from the Angolan. We don't know that, but that's what we did. That shows, again, our brilliance as a people. Even the language that we speak that is vilified as black language or some kind of, we disparage how some of us communicate when we don't say TH or roll an R. We got that from the West African part of us. And we gave it a name in 1970s called Ebonics. It was a unique African language. But how many of us know that?
Yeah. And the thing is that it's okay to move into a larger space, because we all have as human beings, we have a right to be free, to go wherever we desire to go,
you
where
choose
we,
to be.
yes. But we also have a responsibility to maintain our cultural integrity, to maintain ourselves and understand who we are as a people. And we have a unique cultural history that we should always share and pass down to the next
psychology
generation.
of the people is passed down through the culture. And there is a thing called cultural imperialism, where the dominant group's culture becomes the whole society's culture. It happened to the Egyptians when the Greeks came in with, you know, so-called Alexander. He wasn't the great, but, you know, so all the Greeks at that time, I mean, all the Egyptians, you know, these were thousands of years after the pyramids, but they had to speak Greek. Then the Romans came in, okay, and they had to do, and everybody had to follow some of their cultural. Same thing with people of African descent and other groups. We have a European-based society. Okay, we don't need a black. They don't need a Black History Month because there's New Orleans, you know, in Louisiana, but there's a place in Europe called Orleans in France. Okay, everywhere you look, there is something European cultural that dominates. I'm not saying that is wrong with that, but that's the reality. And who were those people that was established, like you said, here in San Antonio, on that river? You know, where it is our way, from what you told me in the first show, we always develop things upon the river. And the premise of this video and film that you're put together with Brother Logic, Walk on the River, is to emphasize that fact of what San Antonio. How you put it? You put it better than I did. Why you said Walk on the River? I want to end with that.
Because it's a continuation of our history. We have built along some of the great rivers of the world. We built the pyramids on the Nile River. We built great civilizations on the Congo River and the Niger River. And needless to say, in spite of our enslavement and being brought here to America, we have continued to build on the great rivers of the world. And one of those rivers is here in San Antonio.
Wow, I like that.
And therefore, we have built a community here, a very rich history and cultural rich history that we should be very proud of and know.
Put up that, I want to put up that poster one more time before we go. We got less than 30 seconds. Yes, people. Where can people see this?
Yes, Walk on the River, Black History Alamo City. Just go to walkontheriver.com and you can get all the information concerning the film. And we really appreciate this opportunity, of course, being here with my brother.
As always, peace. Hotep. Bye-bye.